When I looked you up, there were a lot of articles that said you were a racist and a white supremacist. Do you think those narratives are true that the media are writing about you?
Hungry for the road all my life, thirsty for adventure all my youth, chasing all my freedoms down Liberty Avenue.
We're sitting here with Thierry Baudet. Can you tell me the history of the location that we're sitting in at the moment?
Right, so thank you for being here and thank you for interviewing me. We're here in the cellar of the Forum for Democracy building at one of the canals in Amsterdam. And it's a special place for us because when I started all this, I was a PhD student. I was writing my PhD, and it was back in the 2014s, 2015s, and I wanted to set up a think tank. So I was able to rent a small cellar, which is this one. And now, of course, we're renting the whole building, so we have a huge organization now. But I wanted a small place where we could organize get-togethers for people who thought differently about current affairs. And we were talking about the European Union and immigration and globalism and the dollar as a currency standard and the war or the situation in Ukraine, which was already happening at the time. And there was so much going on, it was so interesting, and we were sensing that there was a lot of interest among the population in our ideas, and then we felt we had to do more. So I started running for office, for parliament. And in 2017, so 3 years after we initially started here, I got elected. And then Forum for Democracy as a political party started. And now in 2022, we're the largest party in terms of members in the Netherlands. And we won the 2019 elections. We turned out as the largest party at the ballot box. And now we are the only party explicitly opposing the Great Reset, the COVID narrative, the war in Ukraine, and almost all of the other plans of the globalists that are connecting so many of us around the globe at the moment.
When I first looked into you, it was maybe around a week ago, and people in the Netherlands were telling me, you need to interview Teddy, he's amazing. I've had similar articles written about me back home, so instantly my instant reaction was like, oh gosh, and then I realised actually they've made these false narratives about me. Do you think those narratives are true that the media are writing about you?
No, these are swear words. Racist, fascist, anti-Semite, homophobic, hater of women, and so on and so forth, hater of nature. They just create these swear words, these words to give you a negative aura, to invite people not to listen to you.
So what is true? Who is Teddy?
I think I am a genuinely open-minded person who is interested in ideas, who loves art, who loves life, who loves love. I love being with people and sharing conversations and having, spontaneous interaction with people from around the world. And I'm genuinely concerned with the direction the West is heading. I think we've been governed for decades now by politicians who do not have our, and that means us as citizens, our best interests in mind. So I feel that we are being robbed of our future. I'm almost 40. I've just, my wife just gave birth to our first child.
Congratulations.
It's wonderful, but I just feel that whereas we have the option to live beautiful lives with lots of wealth and lots of opportunities, our politicians are forcing us through fake narratives like regime change in the Middle East, like the necessity of migration, like the climate change mystique, like the COVID story, which is largely fake. I mean, currently the situation in Ukraine and the supposed shortage in natural gas and fossil fuels. which causes prices to sear up high.
Let's start talking
All
about
of
some
that,
of
I mean,
those.
it just makes our lives terrible, and that's what drives me. So all of these swear words, just to finish the question, I, they don't touch me at all. I'm doing this for everyone, no matter your color, your creed, your race, your history. This is about the quality of the future of our lives.
Back in New Zealand, they say that there is no globalist movement, there are no globalists. They say that that's just a big conspiracy theory, and you've just got people who genuinely believe that that is a better way forward for the world. What would you say to those people that don't believe in globalists?
Read your stuff.
But what stuff?
For example, read the minutes of the World Economic Forum meetings. Read the minutes of the United Nations. Read what the Bill Gates Foundation is saying. Read what the Rockefellers are saying. Read what the European Union is saying. Globalism is the official ideology of the established institutions. They believe there is such a thing as a global policy for mankind, which all governments, national governments, should implement. And that's why they're creating all these transnational treaties, like the Marrakesh Immigration Treaty, like the Climate Accords of Paris, like all of the global measures pertaining to COVID measures. They think at a global level. They believe that national differences shouldn't matter, that we should have a rational technocracy, bureaucracy at a planetary level. This is what the global elites actually believe, and it's ridiculous to ignore that, to deny that.
What are some of the key issues with globalism and the idea of globalists?
Well, the problem is that at the deepest level, the great thing about humanity, the great thing about what we are, whatever we are, however we're created. I mean, we have differences about this. Some people think it's the Christian God, some people think it's the Islamic God, and so on and so forth. But there's something uniquely special about the human individual, which is that we have our own ideas. And these ideas may differ. We may not agree on everything, and we may have arguments and so on. But ultimately, all of us, 7 billion people in the world, all of us have ideas, and all of us try to contribute to the development of knowledge. And that means we're 7 billion individual brains working on this problem of how to proceed in life. If we centralize that and bring it back to, let's say, 15 or 20 or 100 big brains who believe they can govern our lives better, then we are reducing the total intelligence that governs our lives dramatically. And so the ultimate outcome is going to be a lot less good than what it would be if we would all be free to live our lives according to the way that we would like to live our lives. And you are a fantastic example of that. You are an individual who decided to travel the world and interview people, right? On your own account. You were genuinely interested, you wanted to talk to people, you wanted to travel. Wow. And you were creating knowledge. People were watching this video and they're like, oh, this is this guy from the Netherlands, I never heard of him, whatever. And then maybe in a couple of days you interview someone else. This is something central planning could never achieve. And that is why countries and parts of the world that have been decentralized for centuries, for example, Western Europe, have always led the way in terms of innovation. Western Europe was the innovative center of the world during the Reformation, which broke away from the Catholic unified Europe that we used to have. The industrialization, which was the result of the fact that Germany and Britain and France were competing with one another. And there's so many other examples. Colonization, whatever you think of it in moral terms, it was a competition between nations, where France wanted to own more land than Spain and Italy and so on. So decentralized organizations, whether it's at the level of nation states or at the level of the individual, are always more productive, more innovative, more creative, more free, more interesting than centralized organizations. And if we are going to try to centralize the globe, the world, we're going to end at a perennial stasis, at a complete stop in freedom, innovation, and also ultimately happiness, because what makes us happy is if we are in control of our own lives.
One of the things that you spoke about earlier was immigration, and it's something we've noticed being in Europe, that the borders are very open and it is so easy for people to come and go. Once they get into one country, you can kind of be anywhere you want.
Of course. Yeah.
When it comes to globalism, people would say, well, the reason that we need globalism is because you've got countries like Africa and India and they need more help, and so when you've got wealthy nations, they should be helping more. When migrants want to come through, you're actually helping. What would you say to that?
Well, it's not true that we're helping people by allowing them to immigrate. €1 or $1 spent in the Netherlands, it is much less efficient than €1 or $1 spent in Africa. Because with $1 or €1, you can buy in Africa, you can buy so much more than you can buy in the Netherlands. So if we would be serious about helping these people, which is not the agenda of the globalists. The agenda of the globalists is to destroy nation states. And that's why they want perennial migration, so to destroy national identities. But if we were serious about helping these people, we would first stop all the ridiculous regime change operations. And secondly, we would send money to their countries to help them in their respective regions, so they can also contribute to rebuilding their societies. We don't need migration to help these people. We don't need migration to solve troubles in the world. We need realistic foreign policies and not the kind of neoconservative regime change policies. And we need serious development aid, but not migration.
What is your take on the war in Ukraine? Why do you think that war has happened, and who do you think are the key players that are involved in it?
I think ever since the French Revolution, the West has been obsessed with the idea of destroying Russia. And Russia is important because it holds the heartland. It holds the connection between Asia, high IQ, and Western Europe, high IQ. So there's a very important challenge here. If you want to rule the world, you need to divide the heartland. You need to divide Western Europe on the one hand and Eurasia on the other hand. In short, you need to make sure that Germany and Russia should never connect. So this has been the obsession of the French under Napoleon, directly after the French Revolution. It became the obsession of the English during the First World War. And after that, it became the obsession of the Americans since the Second World War and onwards. So, what should you do to isolate and destroy Russia? You need to connect to all the countries bordering on it, right? And that is why the American deep state has taken a very significant interest in Ukraine, basically from the collapse of the Soviet Union and the fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989, 1990. 1991, 1992, and so on. And what's currently happening is that Putin attacked this stronghold of the American deep state, which is based in Ukraine, at a moment when he believed the West was weak. And the West was weak, is weak, because of the destructive COVID policies, because of the ridiculous climate change policies, because of our self-destructive immigration policies, our self-destructive euro currency policies. We've done almost everything we could to destroy ourselves, and now Russia is striking back. So I'm really happy about this battle, because finally there's a front. A front has been opened against the globalists. I hope Russia will win. I think it's fantastic that someone like Putin exists. I think it's one of the most hopeful things in the world today.
Why is that? Why is
Because
Putin
he's fighting the
wonderful?
globalists. He's fighting the French Revolution, essentially.
What does a win look like, though? Because there's a lot of discussion about nuclear
Well, I'm
war. Do you not
afraid
think
that a
that's going to
win
happen?
will look like a stalled, a frozen conflict. But the best thing would be if NATO would fall apart, if the EU would fall apart, and if the American empire would fall apart.
Donald Trump warned NATO that this would be the outcome. Why did NATO not listen to him? Do you have any insight into why that
Well,
could
Donald
have
Trump never, he was able to call himself the President of the United States, but obviously he never was the President of the United States.
been? What do you mean by that?
He was just a monkey being allowed to sit in the Oval Office, have the placard President.
Would you think the same about Biden?
Essentially, yes, but so who really governs the United States? That's the deep state. That's the bureaucracy. That's the system of civil servants, the military-industrial complex, big pharma, big tech, big finance. There are a couple of huge institutions, and as a whole, they govern nations. This is the same in the Netherlands, it's the same in France, in Britain, in the United States. So we have differing individuals whose ego is flattered by being, president, whatever, blah, blah, blah. And they spend a lot of money on election campaigns, and they're like, oh, I'm the president, blah, blah, blah. But ultimately, their decisions are not going to be of great effect. And that's the same, the promise of Donald Trump was terrific, it was great. It was like as if God had put a stairs down from the clouds to the earth, and there came Donald Trump. It was just
It's the first time I've heard him described like that.
It was just
We might try and get a graphic of
Ah,
Donald just floating.
yeah, there he is.
Clouds,
But it was
a
mostly
cherub baby.
it was mostly Steve
heart.
Bannon, of course. Steve Bannon
Okay.
was the genius behind that. But this is what happened. It was just it's happening. The second coming. Wow. But then, of course, I realized that, and I think he realized too, you enter the White House, and then you become acquainted with real power. And real power does not bow to elections. Real power is not interested in democracy. This is somewhere else. And that's the fascinating thing about Putin's life story, if you read about it, is that he, at some point, seems to have realized it. He idealized the West. He wanted Russia to become part of the West. He wanted Russia to become part of the European Union, to become part of NATO. He loves classical music. He loves everything about the West. But he realized that the West was taken over like a cancer takes over a human body. And we've been taken over by a deep state that seeks to continue its own existence at the expense of its national populations. And the tragedy is that the national populations do not realize that.
When we landed here, the first thing that I noticed was a lot of the government buildings had the pride flag everywhere. And this is something that has been on my mind coming from New Zealand, because New Zealand is relatively similar like that. Now, I have so many close friends that associate with pride, and I don't care about that. But what I do care about is it seems like that becomes more of an identity than your nation or than anything else. It's like your sexuality now becomes your identity.
Yeah.
Why is that so prevalent here in the Netherlands? When I've seen more people either fly their flag upside down, which is in solidarity we've learnt with the Netherlands, with the farmers that are protesting here. I've seen a lot of the red bandana, which is also the farmers' protest, and then it's just the pride flag. But I have not seen people flying the flag of the Netherlands the right way round. Where is the national identity gone?
National identity has gone astray. It's gone. It's away. Because on the one hand, we have people identifying, as you say, with the pride flag or the EU flag or the NATO or the Ukrainian flag even. And on the other hand, you have the people showing the Dutch flag the upside down, not right, red, white, blue, but blue, white, red. And that's part of the strategy. As tragic as it may be, the globalists want to destroy national identities because they want to install global governance, or at least continental government, EU government, and so on. So it's part of the plan. It's sad.
The other day in Parliament, you gave a speech where you were rallying off a lot of facts around what was happening in the world, and the rest of Parliament walked out on you. How did that feel?
Hele generaties Europeanen werden zodoende onderwezen door Marxisten, of ze nu pro-Sovjet of pro-Mao waren. Een goed voorbeeld is St. Anthony's College in Oxford, waar Sigrid Kaag haar MPhil heeft gedaan. En wat weinig meer is in feite dan een opleidingsinstituut voor westerse geheime diensten. Dat wil dus zeggen voor precies de globalistische elites die achter de schermen onze levens willen plannen.
Meneer Baudet, we hebben de afspraak gemaakt. Het gaat niet over de persoon. De minister is hier aanwezig als minister van Financiën. Het gaat er helemaal niet over waar zij gestudeerd heeft. Dus ik vind ook een soort complot over waar ze gestudeerd heeft, vind ik echt niet gepast. Nee, ik wil er ook niet over discussiëren. U gaat gewoon verder met uw betoog. Ja, u gaat verder.
St. Anthony's College staat bekend als de Spy College in Oxford.
U gaat verder.
En dat is waar de Britse geheime dienst mensen recruteerde. Dat is een gegeven, dat is een feit. Kan iedereen opzoeken. Ja. En het laat zien hoe verbonden het marxisme was met de deep state. Al decennia en nog steeds.
U rondt af, meneer Baudet.
Nou, die mensen dus die nu weglopen. Ja, die mensen, de erfgenamen van deze misdadige ideologie. Die de Franse en Russische revoluties heeft veroorzaakt. Een ideologie die zich transformeerde tot cultureel marxisme in de tweede helft van de 20e eeuw. Die mensen hebben de agenda van het moderne globalisme bepaald. En ik kan niet begrijpen waarom de leden van het kabinet nu weglopen. Het is een feit dat Sigrid Kaag aan St. Anthony's College in Oxford heeft gestudeerd. En het is ook een feit dat dit een perfect voorbeeld is van de verbondenheid van geheime diensten, marxisme en de recrutering van een mondiale deep state.
Ik schors de vergadering even voor een moment.
I didn't feel anything at the moment.
Is it not frustrating?
I look down on these people too much to feel frustrated by their behavior. But so what I feel, I don't feel very much at that moment. But what I think is that it's dangerous for everything, for democracy. If we're apparently entering times where majorities can just say, we don't want to hear those facts, we walk away, then it's going to be very difficult to change things in a democratic way, in a peaceful way. So emotionally, I'm already completely detached from these morons, these ridiculous people. But intellectually, I'm very worried.
How can people create change if they're not being heard? Because the farmers have been protesting. Some of those protests have got, not really violent, but I'd say aggressive in terms of putting bales everywhere, and it's become physical. What does change look like from a democratic perspective in the Netherlands? Is it possible anymore?
That's a very good question. And I would like to answer in a very hopeful manner, but I'm not sure my intellectual integrity allows me to. We've reached a point where I think the system is trying to defend itself by almost any means possible. So we've seen dramatic censorship on Google and Facebook and so on social media. Obviously, we've been seeing that kind of censorship for years already on the mainstream media. We're now seeing that judges are sanctioning free speech and limiting it. We've seen election fraud in the United States, obvious election fraud. So I'm very worried about the means left to us to oppose this. And that is why I've been arguing for the creation of a parallel society. I think it's very important for us to connect and to create our own parallel food chains, set up our own schools, create our own means of exchange, like cryptocurrencies and so on. I really think that our situation is comparable to the situation of the Jews in the German ghettos in the year 1000. We have to survive on our own. We have to get off the grid. We have to realize that the system is not interested in making compromises. They are interested in pushing their agenda forward. And we have to just back down, get out of it, and connect with one another.
You talked about the Jews. I know you were taken to court by some of the Jewish organisations about some memes that you had posted on social media. Do you see correlations between what happened with the Holocaust and what happened with COVID over the time period of COVID here in the Netherlands?
Well, what I was trying to say was that the way in which the Jews were being looked down upon in the 1930s and 40s and also before that in Western Europe and excluded from social life was comparable to the way the unvaccinated were being excluded from social life. And every analogy, every historical analogy that you draw obviously has elements that are different. That's always the case. I mean, at the same time, it's our only point of reference. So it was an attempt to explain a certain situation, and I still think that it was legitimate to do so.
You talk about COVID being more of a planned event as opposed to being a natural pandemic. Why do you think it was planned? Who do you think was behind that?
Well, there are two things. The first is that it's very remarkable how right before the outbreak of COVID-19 in January 2020, there had been exercises by governments on how to respond to the outbreak of respiratory viruses like coronaviruses, like Event 201, like Clade X, like a few others, Crimson Contagion. There have been several exercises, and that's very remarkable. So there was a complete program already present on how to respond on a coronavirus outbreak, and that's odd. The second thing about it, but those are suspicions. Ultimately, there are suspicions. But the second thing about it is that by April or May 2020, it was completely clear to every government and every healthcare official that COVID-19 was not a great threat to our health. Yet, they continued for a year and a half with their ridiculous policies. And lockdowns were quickly proven not to be efficient in bringing down contagions, and at the same time were much more destructive to economic life, social life, and even healthcare of the general health of the population. So all these COVID policies were clearly inefficient, and yet governments pursued them anyway. So there cannot be any other logical conclusion than that they used the COVID pandemic and the panic about it to impose severe controls on society.
What are some of the legislative changes that happened here in the Netherlands that were pushed through? Were they pushed through under urgency here in the Netherlands, like specific pieces of legislation during COVID?
Oh yeah, we were not allowed to post things on the internet anymore that were critical about the government policies. We were not allowed to enter shops, cafes, restaurants, schools, churches were closed. People were not allowed to have sex anymore. There were official government regulations.
How did they manage that?
Now we had to masturbate on a meter and a half distance. This is. I'm not joking.
Wait, really?
There was a formal advice issued by the government, published on government websites. This is true. This is.
How effective was that?
I didn't check.
Well, you've got a baby, so.
I didn't check. I don't know. No, but I've been married for some time now, and I'm very happy with my wife.
How was that legislation? Was it to do with strangers? So if you go out on a date, you're not meant to.
Yeah,
was that what it was? More
but I mean, what happened to us? That government is advising on this. This is how intrusive the policies were, and also, just think about the psychology of these civil servants and politicians issuing those regulations. What are you thinking if you really believe that you are so important and your philosophy and thought and so on is so important that you can actually legislate this to people?
Well, you'd think that they would just start
That's
by banning
insane.
Tinder and Grindr and all of those first.
Right, or whatever.
Be a
But
quicker way of.
the whole... in my view, if you really believe there's something going on that's really dangerous, the maximum point a government should get at is say, we advise you not to go out, but it's your own life. You are free. If you want to take the risk, take the risk. That's the maximum point a government could ever go. Anything further is dictatorial, is communism, is dictatorship.
Was there any long-term legislation changes though? So in New Zealand,
Oh
we
yeah,
had
others.
Okay, what were some of the long-term legislative changes that they made during COVID? Because what happened in New Zealand, just to give you a little bit of context.
Yeah, go ahead.
So we rushed through laws like the abortion law, which means we now abort up to full term for any reason. They can decide to do that. Yeah, we've got the widest abortion laws in the world. So are there any other like long-term legislative changes that happened here that normally would have gone through a proper process that didn't?
Yeah, we had an entire law about pandemics and emergency situations, which makes it much more easier for the government now to impose lockdowns, to prolong those lockdowns, and to have all kinds of house surges, control over businesses, control over restaurants and social gatherings that would have been thought unthinkable under non-COVID times, but they're prolonged. They're forever. These are power grabs by the government, and they use the fear, the scare of pandemic to pass them. And the same, by the way, is true for social media. This is very important for us, for an opposition party like us. We don't have access to mainstream media. So the only way in which we can spread our message is through social media. And social media have installed misinformation policies where everything they say is misinformation. So it used to be like, COVID comes from a lab. That's misinformation. Half a year later, COVID does not come from a lab. Misinformation, right? So it's just whatever the government says is the truth, and everyone who challenges that is spreading misinformation. So but they passed a law which now obliges social media platforms to conform to whatever the government says is misinformation. Wow. I mean, can you think of a single dictator in world history who wouldn't have loved that kind of legislation? It's very scary. But most people are like, oh yeah, that's important because we don't want fake news in our lives, right? You know, it's really, people are so ignorant about the implications of this.
In New Zealand, our Prime Minister set up a disinformation advisory board, and then she's actually gone and hired a disinformation project to run different reports for her, but it's on the sly, so it's very hard to find out that they're actually government funded. And then they go to the mainstream media and they say these people are disinformation and this person is this and that person's that, and it goes all through mainstream media, and it all comes directly from the Prime Minister's office, but they don't report on that. They don't say this report was brought to you by Jacinda Ardern. But they should. I think they should have legislation that shows that. What is the solution to these problems? Because a new government could get elected tomorrow, just like that, but they'll still go through the same issues of bribery and corruption and being manipulated. How do you solve that on a higher level?
I think the only person who can solve that is Putin.
Oh, really? He's that strong. How would he solve that?
Well, this is a geopolitical question, right? So, to solve a geopolitical question, you have to act at the geopolitical level. I'm sure your viewers would like me to say, look, we have to get together, and that's all fine. I mean, we must get together. I'm all for that. But ultimately, the globalists can only be fought and defeated at the global level. So we have a front now. That's Ukraine. And the good is fighting the bad.
Is it your view that America has influenced the war in Ukraine?
Not influenced. America is fighting the war in Ukraine.
What's the benefit for them?
Rationally, there's no benefit. But irrationally, and empires always fall because of irrational considerations. It's their psychopathic self-image of being the promise for the world to liberate itself from its national identities. So the United States, sadly, doesn't have an ethnic core, doesn't have an origin as a nation, right? It's a new land. It doesn't have a history. It's sort of immigration country. They were founded on genocide against the Indians. And so they have developed this crazy psychopathic mindset that it's their historic mission on the planet to liberate nations from their history. That is what America is. And this is a very sad thing for the world. The American unification is probably the greatest tragedy in the history of civilization to have occurred. And their mission statement, their story, their ideology is therefore to destroy every rootedness on the planet. So we can all become Americans, right? We can all watch porn, eat fast food, and watch Hollywood movies. That is what it's about. And I mean, Russia has a heroic history of thwarting such psychopathic globalist ambitions.
What is some of that
It did
history?
so with Napoleon. It did so with Hitler. Ultimately, the Russians defeated communism, right? The Berlin Wall didn't fall because of Reagan. It fell because the Russians realized, look, this is not what we're going to do. This is not what we want. It's an inimical ideology that has taken control over our country. And they were fed up with it. So the Russians decided, let the Berlin Wall fall. Let this end. This should end. And then they reinvented themselves. And now they are fighting the globalists. That is what the mission of Putin is. And that's how I understand world history. That's what I think world history is. It's the ultimate, it's the never-ending, the always continuing battle between the one and the many, as Plato says, as Lucifer says. The oneness, that's what the devil wants, oneness. And then there's the plenitude, there's the pluriformity which is something that only God can understand from His eye. But humans must live with the fact that they cannot understand the diversity, the meaning of the diversity. And that's why it's also a spiritual battle. That's why the globalists want Homo sapiens 2.0, because they want to control that unity. They want to make sure that that unity is, that they dream of, is safeguarded for the future.
There's been a lot of talk about the cult-like movement of people that were pro the vaccine and pro the farmers being shut down, and it's almost like a cult in the terms of how people can follow the government and follow the media. How have you seen that play out within Parliament? Do you see it as people moving as a one rather than as individuals, making individual choices?
No, okay, look, I like the farmers, but the trouble of the farmers is that they only think about the farmers' interests. And that's been the trouble, basically, of so many other groups that have been the victims of the globalists' policies. They never understood that this is a battle against all of us. So, if, let's say, an anti-immigration person would go to the farmers and say, let's fight this together, the farmers are very likely to say, no, we don't want to connect with you because, what if they think we're racists, and we really want to fight for the farmers' interests themselves and not for something else, right? This is typical. And then someone comes up, who, can't pay for his energy bills. And the anti-immigration person says, no, I don't want to talk about energy bills. I'm an anti-immigration person. I don't want to connect with you because look, there's maybe no overlap and blah 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 blah. So we're being divided in order to be ruled, and that is something that I find very disappointing about the farmers. That they are currently the ones who get beaten. But they're incapable of realizing that they're part of a much larger movement. And that's why I think they'll lose.
I've talked to a lot of farmers who do realise that they're part of a bigger movement. But do you think that it's the majority just don't understand? Because it seems to me that if people are going to go and protest against the government, it's because they see the government as being the problem, not just necessarily that one policy. Like, not everyone is there because they think that one policy is bad. They're there because they think the government is making poor decisions in general. Because if they thought that one policy was the only problem, they probably wouldn't protest, because they'd say, well, at least they're listening to us on X, Y, Z.
Yeah. Well, I'm happy you spoke to such farmers. But I think the general tendency in this country, and this is a general phenomenon among democratic nations, is that people understand their individual troubles as individual troubles, and that they are therefore susceptible to government offering them relief for their individual situations. So my prediction is that the farmers are now making a lot of noise only to agree to better terms of expropriation within a year or so. The government has the printing press, the money printing press, here, right here. And they say, okay, you get €1,000 per acre, let's say. And then the farmers protest. And then after a year, the government says, okay, we're going to give you 2,000 per acre. And then the farmers say, okay, let's do it. I think that's the way it's going to be.
Just an easy
But I support the farmers nevertheless, and I really hope they will come to a higher understanding of what the battle for their land really is about. But I'm afraid it will just go down in the same way that it has been going down for centuries with every sector of our society. They've destroyed every sector of our society, haven't they? They've destroyed the churches, they've destroyed the educational branch, they've destroyed small and medium-sized businesses, by intrusive regulations. They've destroyed the family. They've destroyed the traditions of the families by inheritance and income taxes and so on. They've destroyed everything. So are they really not going to succeed in destroying the farmers? I don't think so. I think they will succeed.
What can people do if they watch this and they want to fight back and they want to stand against them? What can they actually do? What's an actionable thing that they can do?
I'm not sure there's a lot they can do.
I'm
I think
hopeful,
living.
Thierry.
No, I think well. I
So
think
you're doomed. Goodbye.
I think living in the truth is important and beautiful and worthwhile. And if you're hanging on a cross, you know, and people say, "What can we do?" It's like you cannot do anything. You are dying. Let's just live in the moment. And I think that's the case. I think that's our situation.
And is that what your idea of alternate societies
Yeah,
come in?
the white world, the European world is dying. We are being destroyed through a deliberate agenda by globalists to destroy us. It's happening right now, and we can talk about it. We can give words to it, and that in itself has meaning.
Before we wrap up, I want to talk about the climate change policies and then your book, which you've thankfully given me a copy of, so I'll be able to read it on the way and get more of an understanding. But why do you speak out so thoroughly, so intensely against climate change? Do you not agree that it's happening, or do you agree that it just differs to what the government says is happening?
I think the climate change narrative is the central narrative that the globalists use to control all aspects of our economy. Because every aspect of our economy, every aspect of our life implies the emission of carbon dioxide. If we breathe carbon dioxide. If we use a car, we exhale, or whatever you call it. You have carbon dioxide. So every element of our economic life implies the creation of carbon dioxide. So if you decide to call carbon dioxide a problem, then you, by implication, you have control over every element of our economic life. So it's super important to talk about this, because once this implication, this assumption is mainstream, then government basically has a white card to make regulation for every element of our lives. So that's why I think the discussion about climate change is super important. Secondly, I'm pretty convinced that the climate has, throughout the history of the planet, always changed. That the current developments in the climate are not way as impactful as they would like us to believe. I mean, it's in 150 years, it's only perhaps maybe 1 degree warmer now than in 1850 or so. And 1850 happened to be the end of a small ice age. So it was the lowest point in the development of the climate for centuries. Back in the year 1000 or so, it was probably much warmer on the planet than it is now. So there's a general development. There are lots of elements that influence the climate which are not man-caused or man-made, like the sun, development of the sun, the clouds, very complex weather developments, planetary constellations, and so on and so forth. And then, even if it were true that we as human beings would cause a bit of climate change, then it would be much more efficient to respond by irrigation, by building dikes, by adaptation, in short, than by reduction of carbon dioxide. So to me, scientifically and intellectually, the whole story doesn't make sense, but I understand why power-hungry politicians are willing to use it, because it gives them a a trump card, a joker card to control our lives up to their tiniest details.
I like that explanation.
Thank you.
So that's quite well done. All right, tell us about your book, The COVID
All right,
Conspiracy.
so this is here.
And then this isn't a book tour. You walked in and you sat it on my lap, and I said, we'll talk about it at the end because I have not read this book. But
So it's
I would
called-
like to know about it.
I've written a book which was a instant number one bestseller in the Netherlands. It's
Oh
called
my, I shall curtsy to you.
The COVID Conspiracy, The Globalist Takeover and the Great Reset. Steve Bannon wrote a beautiful preface of it, and the first line is, Thierry Baudet is one of the most important grassroots leaders in the world. So I'm very grateful for that. And I talk about essentially all of the things that we talked about during the interview, which is that during COVID, I realized that the real powers in the world are not democratically elected governments, but the powers behind those governments. And that those in government, the people that may call themselves prime minister or president or whatever for 4 years or 8 years, they are basically the lackeys of a deeper system which aims, perhaps naturally, perhaps like every global system, aims to control our lives to an increasing extent and to create a world government. And COVID to me was a dry run for a social credit system on the Chinese model with QR codes, a digital ID, lockdowns, social distancing, and so on and so forth. Irrational policies, which even went so far as to pass the holy border, I would like to say, between the public sphere and the individual body. The physical integrity of the individual's body by forcing us to take poisonous vaccinations, which are very dangerous to the immune system, which do not help against COVID, and all of it was a criminal exercise for 2 years imposed on all of us. And it meant that to me, it meant that they showed their true agenda, which was the Great Reset.
You've been in Parliament for a while, and you mentioned before how you think that people are being manipulated, and how MPs and Prime Ministers are technically pawns in a much larger game. How do you think they get manipulated? Have you seen it in action? Have you experienced it?
No, they get manipulated because of social pressure mostly. They don't have a particularly high IQ, and they're simple people. They have an IQ of 105, 110, nothing special. And they are really excited of making a little bit of money and being in Parliament and having dinner with the French ambassador and so on. So they're simple people who are excited about having a job of some importance. And so they are very scared of losing that. And they're very willing to go along with basically anything because they don't have any serious thoughts about anything anyway. You could tell them that look, I don't know. Let's say that it's imperative that we only drive diesel cars, and then you have some research presented to them, and they won't look any further than that. They'll just say, "Oh, there's a research about that. Let's make laws." Whoa, they don't have a clue. They're like Joe Biden, you know. They don't even know they're alive.
I wouldn't
zombies.
give Joe Biden the credit of 100.
They're zombies.
What are some of the policies that you would like to see enacted from your party? Your key drivers?
So I want to leave the European Union. I want to leave NATO. I want to have referendums Swiss style all the time about everything. I don't want mass immigration into my country. I want low taxes. I want to get rid of all climate change policies. I want more use of fossil fuels than now. I'm in favor of fossil fuels, as much use of fossil fuels as possible, because fossil fuels are great for the environment. That's my belief. I want classic 19th century art, and before that, classic European art, classical music, and so on. I want lots of babies, lots of sex, lots of beautiful architecture, and I love good food and great wine.
doesn't sound all bad, to be honest. All right, that's the wrap.
Vote for me.
Thank you, Thierry, for
Thank
that.
you.
Oh, last thing, where can people find you if they watch this and they want to see more and are from New Zealand or other countries?
They should go to FVD, that's forum, and then the V for victory, and then the D for democracy,
FVD.
fvdinternational.com.
FVDinternational.com. All right, thank
Exactly.
you.
Thank you very much.
Congratulations again.